In a world that had forgotten her, one woman's hands remembered everything. When wealth met talent and cruelty faced beauty, a broken piano became the instrument of redemption. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The grand ballroom of the Westford Hotel glittered with the soft glow of chandeliers and the sparkle of expensive jewelry. The annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital Foundation was in full swing, with Seattle's elite dressed in their finest attire. Margaret Price, the event coordinator, surveyed the room with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The champagne was flowing, the hors d'oeuvres were being devoured, and the donation pledges were already exceeding expectations. In one corner of the ballroom sat an old grand piano, its once glossy surface now marred with tiny scratches and water rings. The hotel manager had apologized profusely when Margaret discovered the state of the instrument. The professional pianist they'd hired had canceled at the last minute due to illness, and the replacement piano that was supposed to arrive hadn't shown up. The hotel's old piano, which normally sat unused in a secondary event space, had been hastily brought in as a placeholder, though everyone agreed it was too out of tune to actually be played. "It's just for aesthetics anyway," Margaret had said with a dismissive wave. "No one will even notice it's not being used with all the recorded music we have playing." Among the catering staff working the event was Eleanor Shaw, a quiet woman in her late 30s. She moved efficiently between tables, refilling water glasses and clearing empty plates. Unlike some of her co-workers who chatted among themselves, when supervisors weren't looking, Eleanor focused intently on her work, her movements precise and methodical. She had been with the catering company for just 3 months, and most of her colleagues knew little about her beyond her remarkable work ethic. Brad Winters stood near the bar with a group of fellow real estate developers, all slightly inebriated and growing louder as the evening progressed. Brad was well known in Seattle's business circles as much for his boisterous personality as for his successful developments. With his third whiskey in hand, he was entertaining his companions with exaggerated stories of his recent vacation to Monaco. "And then I told the prince, yes, the actual prince, that his yacht was nice but needed better entertainment options," Brad bellowed, causing his friends to erupt in laughter. As the laughter subsided, Brad's attention drifted to the old piano in the corner, and a mischievous gleam appeared in his eyes. "Hey, you know what would be hilarious? Getting someone to try to play that disaster of an instrument. I heard the hotel manager say it's completely shot." His friend James chuckled. "What do you have in mind?" Brad scanned the room, his gaze landing on Eleanor as she quietly collected empty glasses from a nearby table. There was something about her downcast eyes and unpretentious demeanor that made her the perfect target for his amusement. "Watch this," Brad said, straightening his designer tie before striding confidently toward Eleanor. "Excuse me, miss," he called out, his voice unnecessarily loud. Several nearby conversations paused as heads turned toward the commotion. Eleanor looked up, surprised to be addressed directly by a guest. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, her hands automatically folding in front of her apron. "My friends and I were wondering, do you play piano?" Brad asked, gesturing toward the instrument with his whiskey glass. Eleanor hesitated, her eyes darting to the piano and then back to Brad. "I used to, sir." Brad's smile widened. "Excellent. Would you mind playing something for us? Just a little entertainment while we wait for the speeches to begin." From across the room, Margaret noticed the interaction and hurried over, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Mr. Winters, is everything all right?" she asked, shooting a questioning glance at Eleanor. "Everything's wonderful, Margaret," Brad exclaimed. "I was just asking this lovely lady to play us a tune on that piano. She says she can play." Margaret's smile tightened. "Oh, but Mr. Winters, that piano is terribly out of tune. Our musician canceled and we—" "All the better," Brad interrupted. Just a bit of fun before all the serious charity business. Come on, everyone could use a laugh. Eleanor stood frozen, her eyes now fixed on the piano across the room. A small crowd had begun to gather, curious about the unfolding scene. The catering supervisor caught Eleanor's eye from the kitchen doorway and gave a slight nod, silently instructing her to comply with the guest's request. "I haven't played in many years," Eleanor said quietly. But Brad was already guiding her toward the piano with a hand on her back, his friends trailing behind with amused expressions. "Don't worry about it being perfect," Brad said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "We're just looking for a little entertainment." As they reached the piano, Eleanor stood beside the bench for a moment, her hand hovering over its worn, velvet surface. The small crowd watched, some with embarrassment for her predicament, others with the same anticipation of amusement that Brad displayed. With a deep breath, Eleanor smoothed her apron and sat down at the piano. She adjusted the bench slightly and placed her hands on the keys without pressing them. There was something about the way she positioned her fingers, with precision and familiarity, that caused a slight shift in the atmosphere. A few people exchanged glances, sensing that perhaps this wasn't going to unfold exactly as Brad had planned. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if centering herself. Then, with no further hesitation, her fingers began to move across the keys. The first notes that emerged from the old piano were indeed slightly out of tune, but what happened next left the growing audience breathless. Eleanor's hands moved with astonishing dexterity, compensating for the piano's flaws with subtle adjustments to her touch. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and despite the instrument's imperfections, the music flowed with such emotion and technical brilliance that a hush fell over the previously chattering crowd. Brad's smug smile faltered, and then disappeared entirely as he watched Eleanor's transformation. Gone was the meek catering staff member. In her place sat a commanding musician whose entire being seemed to channel the music. Her eyes remained closed, her body swaying slightly with the melody's rises and falls. Her fingers danced across the keys with both power and delicacy, drawing sounds from the old piano that no one would have believed possible. As the piece progressed, more guests gravitated toward the piano. Conversations throughout the ballroom quieted, and even the servers paused in their duties to listen. Margaret stood with her hand pressed to her mouth in astonishment. The hotel manager appeared in the doorway, drawn by reports of extraordinary music coming from his supposedly unplayable piano. When Eleanor transitioned seamlessly into Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically challenging pieces in piano literature, audible gasps rippled through the crowd. Her hands moved at breathtaking speed, executing trills and jumps that professional concert pianists would find daunting. Yet there was nothing showy about her performance, only deep connection and authentic expression. Brad had retreated to the edge of the crowd, his face flushed with embarrassment. James leaned over to whisper, "Who is this woman?" As the final notes of Eleanor's impromptu concert faded away, the room erupted in thunderous applause. Eleanor opened her eyes, seemingly surprised by the crowd that had gathered around her. She rose from the bench with the same quiet dignity she had displayed while serving water, offering a small, humble bow before attempting to return to her duties. Margaret intercepted her, taking her hands in a warm grasp. "That was absolutely magnificent. Where did you learn to play like that?" Before Eleanor could answer, an elderly gentleman pushed his way through the crowd. Professor Richard Harmon, a major donor and retired faculty member from the prestigious Colburn School of Music, approached with wide eyes. "It can't be," he said, studying Eleanor's face intently. "Eleanor Chen? Is that really you?" Eleanor nodded slightly, her composure never wavering despite the attention now focused on her. "My God." Professor Harmon turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, You have just been privileged to hear one of the most brilliant pianists of her generation. Eleanor Chen was a prodigy who won the International Chopin competition at 17. She was on track to become one of the world's premier concert pianists before she disappeared from the classical music scene 15 years ago. The music world has wondered what happened to her ever since. A murmur of amazement spread through the gathering. Margaret looked from the professor to Eleanor in astonishment. "Is this true?" Eleanor nodded again, finally speaking in a clear, steady voice that carried throughout the now silent room. "Yes, I studied at Juilliard and performed professionally for several years. But after my husband died unexpectedly, I couldn't bear to continue with public performances. The music reminded me too much of him. He was a violinist. We met at school and often performed together." She looked down at her hands. "I've been working various jobs since then, moving from city to city, playing just for myself in private when I can find a piano. Music is still in my heart, but I chose a quieter life." The conclusion of the charity gala marked not an ending, but a powerful beginning for Eleanor. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in the ballroom had transformed completely from what it had been just hours before. The space that had been filled with superficial conversation and social posturing now hummed with genuine excitement and possibility. Eleanor found herself surrounded by people who had been moved not just by her extraordinary talent, but by the authenticity and vulnerability she had displayed. Professor Harmon, leveraging his considerable influence in the classical music community, personally introduced Eleanor to the board members of the Seattle Symphony who were in attendance. What began as polite interest quickly evolved into earnest enthusiasm as they discussed potential opportunities, guest performances, special recitals, even the possibility of a featured soloist position for their upcoming season. These weren't mere courtesies. The artistic director had recognized in Eleanor's playing a rare combination of technical brilliance and emotional depth that could captivate audiences. The Children's Hospital Foundation director, Dr. Sarah Reeves, approached, Eleanor with tears still visible in her eyes. She explained how music therapy had shown remarkable results with their young patients, particularly those facing extended treatments or terminal diagnoses. On the spot, she announced the creation of the Eleanor Chen Music Healing Initiative, a specially funded program that would provide music education and therapy to children in long-term care. The announcement prompted an immediate wave of additional donations from guests who had been deeply moved by Eleanor's story and performance. Brad Winter's transformation was perhaps the most surprising of all. The man who had intended to make Eleanor an object of ridicule now stood before her with genuine contrition evident in his demeanor. His voice, stripped of its earlier bombastic quality, was quiet and sincere as he pledged a substantial donation to equip the hospital's therapy spaces with high-quality instruments, including, he added without meeting her eyes, a concert-grade piano. Should you consider sharing your gift with the children there? When Eleanor graciously accepted his apology without recrimination, the relief on his face was palpable. As the room gradually emptied, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the old piano that had unexpectedly changed the trajectory of her life. Sitting alone at the bench, she gently traced the worn keys without pressing them, lost in thought about the evening's revelations and the possibilities that suddenly stretched before her. This was how Margaret found her, in a quiet moment of communion with the instrument that had given voice to her dormant passion. "The hotel manager asked me to tell you something," Margaret said, taking a seat beside Eleanor on the bench. "He wants you to know that this piano belongs to you now, if you want it. He's embarrassed about having called it unplayable and insists on having it properly restored and delivered to wherever you'd like." Eleanor's smile, the first full, unguarded smile she had shown all evening, transformed her face, revealing a glimpse of the vibrant young woman she had been before grief had dimmed her light. "That's extraordinarily generous," she replied, "but I think this piano has found its proper home right here. There's something poetic about it remaining in this space, don't you think? Sometimes the most beautiful music emerges from damaged instruments. She paused, running her fingers along a particularly deep scratch in the wood. Just as the most meaningful lives can sometimes emerge from damaged hearts. She pressed a single, pure chord before continuing, the sound resonating with newfound purpose. I believe I'm ready to teach again. Music was always more than performance for me. It was connection. And perhaps, she added with a small nod of determination, I'm ready to perform again too. Not for acclaim, but for the joy of sharing what I love. The transformation extended well beyond that evening. By noon the following day, a smartphone video of Eleanor's impromptu performance had been uploaded to social media platforms, where it spread with astonishing speed. The juxtaposition of her humble appearance against her extraordinary talent, coupled with the brief explanation of her history provided by Professor Harmon, which had also been captured in the recording, created exactly the kind of narrative that captures public imagination. Within 3 days, the video had garnered over 5 million views. National news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a modern fairy tale of hidden genius discovered. Interview requests poured in from major networks, while recording contract offers arrived from leading classical music labels. Eleanor's former catering company issued a gleefully opportunistic press release claiming they had discovered her, though they graciously released her from her contract when it became clear she would no longer be serving hors d'oeuvres. Eleanor approached this sudden attention with the same quiet dignity that had characterized her throughout the gala. She accepted select interviews not to promote herself, but to discuss the healing power of music and the importance of arts education for children, always steering conversations toward the newly established program at the Children's Hospital. Her authentic passion for these causes only endeared her further to the public. 6 months later, Eleanor gave her official comeback recital at Seattle's prestigious Benaroya Hall. The performance had sold out within hours of being announced, with proceeds benefiting the music healing initiative she had inspired. The program featured works by Chopin, Liszt, and Rachmaninoff, challenging pieces that showcased her technical virtuosity, but also included several of her own compositions, written during her years of silence, that revealed the depth of her personal journey. In the front row sat Professor Harmon, beaming with pride as if witnessing the return of a beloved protégé. Next to him was Margaret Price, who had become a close friend and staunch supporter. And, somewhat surprisingly, there sat Brad Winters as well, humbled by the experience and transformed into one of Eleanor's most vocal advocates. He had followed through on his promise to fund music therapy rooms and had recently established a scholarship for underprivileged music students. Before playing her final piece of the evening, Eleanor rose from the bench to address the audience. The woman who had once been nearly invisible now commanded the attention of a packed concert hall with natural grace and quiet authority. Music has always possessed the power to heal, to connect, and to reveal our true selves, she said, her voice no longer soft and hesitant, but clear and confident. Sometimes in life, we need to be broken open to discover that our gifts never truly leave us. They simply wait patiently for the moment when we're ready to embrace them again. She smiled at the children from the hospital seated in a special section, many of whom she had been teaching personally over the past months. When we create beauty, we create possibility. When we share our gifts, no matter how long they've been hidden, we offer others permission to discover their own. As her fingers touched the keys of the magnificent concert grand, so different from the worn hotel piano that had changed her life, Eleanor played with a depth of emotion that could only come from someone who had known both great love and great loss, and had found the courage to begin again. The music filled the hall like light filling darkness, suggesting that sometimes our most painful detours lead us exactly where we need to be. In the days that followed, Eleanor Chen began work on her first album in 15 years. Critics would later call it her finest work, music that could only have been created by someone who understood that broken things, whether pianos or hearts, often produce the most authentic art when finally allowed to sing again.